What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on groundbreaking healthcare innovations. I'm your host, Jeremy Schrand, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive deep into the stories behind medical advancements, featuring insights from global therapeutic experts who are literally changing how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're highlighting the human stories driving medical progress. Join us for an inspiring conversation with Amanda King, Senior Clinical Scientist at CTI, as she shares her journey from pediatric ICU nurse practitioner to leading-edge oncology researcher. Amanda discusses her passion for patient-centered care, the challenges and rewards of clinical trials, and her commitment to advancing therapeutic options for patients with limited treatments. Discover how her personal experiences and dedication to innovation are shaping the future of medicine, and why keeping the patient's voice at the center of research matters now more than ever. Welcome to the podcast, Amanda. We're so lucky to have you here today.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your career before you came to CTI.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a senior clinical scientist here at CTI. I'm a board certified pediatric nurse practitioner and PhD. And I have about 15 years of clinical and research experience in pediatric critical care and oncology. My clinical practice background is in pediatric ICU. So I spent several years managing care for critically ill infants and children in cardiac, surgical, and medical intensive care environments. And I love the ICU. I thought it was a fantastic environment to really develop my skills as a new NP. It was always challenging. I loved the constant learning about a wide variety of diseases that I had to manage. That background really provided me with a broad therapeutic expertise in areas such as oncology, cardiology, infectious disease, some pediatric rare diseases too, just to name a few. But after a couple years, I became interested in pursuing a PhD in nursing so I could move into clinical research to improve care and advance, therapeutic options for patients. Following completion of my PhD, I completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Cancer Institute at the NIH, where I worked for the last 7 years on several early phase oncology therapeutic trials. And the NIH is really where I fell in love with working on clinical trials. And I'm really passionate about, inclusion of patient reported outcomes data, which can better inform about safety and tolerability of investigational drugs. So it was a wonderful experience working at the NIH and kind of being on the front lines for cutting edge oncology research. And it definitely shaped the kind of clinical scientist that I am today.
What made you decide that you wanted to go after that PhD and get into clinical research? And then what brought you to CTI?
As a nurse practitioner, I've always been, really invested in delivering the best possible care to my patients. But when I was out there in clinical practice, it was super rewarding, but I was always kind of drawn to like the bigger picture, like the why behind everything we do. And I was really intrigued by the opportunity to impact healthcare on that broader scale. I just remember encountering so many patients with conditions that didn't have like clear cut protocols or effective treatments. And it just frustrated me. So I think just it became evident that despite our best efforts as clinicians in the hospitals, we just have so many unanswered questions. So that was really my pull to get the PhD. And I think clinical research offers a way to explore those unanswered questions and bridge that gap between, current medical knowledge and the evolving needs of patients. I think my clinical background really provided me with a unique perspective that combines direct patient care with that understanding of real world challenges by patients and practitioners out there in the field. And I just saw clinical research as that natural extension of my role as a nurse practitioner because it's going to allow me to contribute directly to developing new treatments and improving care protocols that are based on evidence. So that was kind of the driving force behind me getting the PhD. And I really just wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And to your second question, kind of what brought me to CTI, when I was looking to transition from government research to industry, I was really looking for an opportunity to utilize both my clinical and my research expertise to promote patient safety. And there were really a few things that drew me to CTI during my job search. First, I was really drawn to the company's patient-centered approach, and dedication to improving outcomes. As you've already heard, that really aligns very closely with my, professional and personal values as a nurse. But I was also really excited to work on clinical trials on a global scale and also kind of widen out my therapeutic expertise beyond, pediatrics and oncology. Kind of like what I was talking about with the ICU. I love a challenge. I love learning new things. So that was a big appeal for me that CTI has such a broad range of therapeutic areas that it's involved in. And lastly, I was really impressed by how many employees stay at CTI. That's actually really uncommon in industry. And I remember the metric of over 90% of employees stay. So to me, I felt like that really reflected a positive corporate culture and one that I could grow and stay for a long time, which is something that was important to me.
You mentioned your title earlier, Senior Clinical Scientist. Tell us about that role. Tell us what you do specifically at CTI and how do you support clinical trials?
The role was created to address a need. So our sponsors we have kind of evolving needs. They're asking for more and more things from us. So really, the idea was that the clinical scientist could be brought on board to collaborate with the medical director on a trial to support both medical data review and medical monitoring activities for the trial. But really, the main focus for us is on medical data review. So I'm responsible for that really detailed deep dive on the data, providing clinical interpretation that kind of supports medical oversight and safety for our trial patients. I review the data with the medical director, and then I prepare the data presentations for the oversight meetings that we have with the sponsor. And then during that meeting, I present the key medical and safety data trends during those calls. I coordinate any necessary queries to the sites. And I also work with the medical director on some more administrative things like maintaining the study plans, especially the medical monitoring plan, but I can also help weigh in on some of the other study plans just to make sure that we have alignment across all the study documents. And then, really, we can perform other medical monitoring activities too as needed to support the medical director and really just ensure that the sites feel supported and can get their questions answered. It's a collaborative approach, and I really loved doing it so far. It's been fun.
So I would go back to your experience at the NIH. Tell us about some of the stuff that you worked on.
Yeah, that was a fascinating time. So I did a 4-year postdoctoral fellowship in the neuro-oncology branch at the NIH. So I worked in the patient outcomes portion of the branch alongside physicians, nurse practitioners, research nurses, and trainees. And I worked on several different early phase therapeutic trials, which is kind of the focus at NIH, is doing those early phase studies that are harder to do elsewhere. And really, the focus of our team was to collect and provide patient outcomes data, which is so crucial in oncology clinical trials because it really serves as the foundation for assessing, the effectiveness, the safety, and the overall impact of the investigational drug. And this data helps the clinicians understand how patients are responding to treatment in real time, rather than waiting till the end of the study to look at everything. So it can tell them if the patients are improving, if they're having side effects, if they're having complications, and it allows for adjustments to be made during the trial, which can help improve patient retention rates on the study too. So, for the studies that I was working on, I was responsible for the analysis of the patient outcomes data that was collected, and I presented that data to the clinicians and the other trial team members so they knew about important changes and symptoms that patients on the study were reporting. And then that information was used by the trial teams to facilitate discussions with the patients and inform of reporting of adverse events to the regulatory authorities as well. So that was my postdoc. So that was 4 years, and then once my postdoc was done, I transitioned to a clinical staff scientist position within the newly formed Office of Patient-Centered Outcomes Research at NCI, where our team helped develop a standardized approach for measuring symptomatic adverse events across cancer trials in NCI. So using a templated approach really allows us to improve the quality of the data that we get from trials. It better captures the tolerability data of those drugs. And most importantly, we can actually compare outcomes data across different types of cancer, which historically has been impossible because everyone's measuring things in a million different ways at a million different time points. So we're trying to kind of cut down on that. So we have richer data from a smaller number of patients. So, in that role, I led a team of research nurses and data analysts who facilitated incorporation of these patient outcomes data into protocols across a wide variety of oncology therapeutic areas. So, we did some hematologic malignancies, we did do some neuro-oncology, but also some other solid tumor trials as well. And I also contributed to development of an electronic data capture platform, which we used to collect the patient outcomes data that made it easier for clinicians to tap in anytime they want to look at the symptomatic adverse events and the trends over time to facilitate more informed decision making. It was an awesome time at the NIH, and it really sparked my passion for clinical trials, as I said, gave me a ton of expertise across clinical development and trial design and monitoring and safety, data collection, and then some regulatory aspects as well. So it's really what led me here, where I continue to put kind of that patient safety at the forefront of what I do.
Some of these trials can be very complex. What's the most challenging part of working on something so complex?
I think the most challenging part of working on oncology trials is just trying to balance patient safety with scientific rigor in, an environment that's really complex, as you said, and high stakes. Oncology patients are often heavily pretreated, they're frail, oftentimes are in advanced stages of diseases, so it makes them more vulnerable to experiencing adverse effects compared to other therapeutic areas. And it's really hard, I think, to differentiate between disease related symptoms and drug related toxicities. I think that's the thing that came up the most during my time at NIH is trying to sort out, what is disease and what is drug. And doing so accurately is so critical for safety reporting and for getting drugs to market, so it's a huge responsibility that we have, and it's really difficult. So that's one thing. As you mentioned, the trial designs are just really complex too. So, we're using more often these adaptive designs, biomarker driven designs, basket protocols. I think it just requires a higher level of vigilance to ensure that we're adhering to the protocols, that we're stratifying patients correctly, make sure we have, valid scientific data at the end. And something else that's kind of unique about oncology is that we often rely on surrogate endpoints. So things like progression free survival, objective response rate, rather than overall survival, which may not always align with overall survival, so I think that's always the risk too, that, sometimes we might be confident in what we see in these surrogate endpoints. And then once we get to the overall survival, we don't see a net benefit. So it can be a little frustrating, I think, from that standpoint. And then lastly, I think it'd be remiss not to mention like the emotional aspect of working in oncology. It's other therapeutic areas. Patients typically don't die all that often on trials, but it's really common in oncology. So I think it's hard, both working in safety, but really anyone who's working on the studies. I think there's a toll, and I think it takes a certain kind of person to be able to be professional, but also maintain that compassion for the patients and just understand what they're going through and how important it is what we're doing to try and help as many patients as we can.
Yeah, so that's the hard. Now let's talk about the good. What's the most rewarding part about working on these kinds of trials?
I can't tell you how many times people ask me, why would you want to work in oncology? Because of a lot, not necessarily all those things, but definitely the last one. People are like, gosh, that must be so sad. Why do you do it? I take pride in working on trials where I'm helping to bring patients with very limited treatment options access to something that's potentially life extending or life altering. Seeing patients respond, sometimes really dramatically, to an investigational drug is so incredibly fulfilling. It never gets old. I love that feeling. And also, it's just like a really fast paced therapeutic area. So, working in first in human and immunotherapy and CAR T, it's just the cutting edge of medical science, and it's changing all the time, which I find really exciting. And it's really an honor to, be a part of a therapeutic area that may, fundamentally change treatment paradigms, for future patients. But on a personal level, I actually lost my mom when I was a teenager to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So working on trials that help cancer patients live longer to be able to see their kids grow up is really meaningful for me. I think the treatment landscape, back in the 90s when my mom was sick was honestly unrecognizable to, the therapeutic options that are available today. And her fight with cancer is really what inspired me to be a nurse in the first place. And being involved in oncology clinical development has really been the most rewarding aspect of my career. So I'm thankful to do it every day. I love it.
Clinical research isn't really an astronaut or a doctor or a firefighter. So what would you tell like a young person who was like maybe interested in science or medical industry and could potentially be interested in clinical research?
The best advice to start, I think, is to just build a solid scientific foundation, whatever that looks like for you. I think biology, pharmacology, is a good place to start if you want to get into clinical research. Getting hands-on exposure early to research, I think, is very beneficial. And I feel like universities are doing this now. I have nieces that are going to college, and they have so many opportunities to get involved in research in the undergraduate level, which I didn't have when I was in training. So I do think this is getting better, that more and more opportunities are made available to younger people. But this can extend back into like, high school, grade school. Get kids involved and excited about science early. I think the best advice I ever got is seek out mentors in the career path that you want. So, a little bit of a soapbox here, but especially people coming from the medical background, like I feel like if you're either as a physician, a nurse, pharmacist, whatever, I feel like we're kind of directed one way in our career. We go through training, we get out, you go to the hospital, and like that's the end of the story for a lot of us. Sometimes we go to the university and do some academia stuff, but I feel like there's a whole wide world out there, in industry and in clinical development where our clinical skills are so valuable to support patient safety. And it's something I wish I had known about earlier. So seek out mentors in the career path that you want, not the one that's kind of typical for, a particular profession, but one that inspires you find out what they did. Get advice from that person. I think that's probably the best advice I ever got. And I kind of deviated. I'm not a nurse in the hospital anymore, and I'm doing what I love. And I think lastly, just remember to keep the patient perspective at the core of everything you do. If you do get into clinical research, I think we all keep it in the back of our minds, but it's definitely at the front of mine. As a nurse, that it starts and ends with the patient. That's why we should be doing what we're doing. I live and die by that, and I think it's good advice for anyone that wants to enter this field to be successful.
What excites you the most about the future of medicine and clinical research?
I think I'm excited about like the convergence of scientific innovation and patient-centered care. When I think about the future, working as a clinical scientist, I see firsthand how fast our field is evolving. Precision oncology, immunotherapies, cell-based treatments. These used to be kind of like magical concepts or distant concepts, and they're here and they're changing survival curves and changing really what's possible for patients with advanced cancer. And ultimately, I think what excites me most is to just be able to help shape a future where research and clinical care are like seamlessly connected, where every oncology trial advances science and it also gives patients hope for better treatment options. And I'm really honored by the role that I play as a clinical scientist to ensure that these advances are developed safely and that we keep, the patient's voice at the center of what we do.
Thank you for joining us today, Amanda. It was really great having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Thank you for joining us for this insightful episode with Amanda King. Her dedication to advancing clinical research and her unwavering commitment to patient-centered care reminds us of the profound impact that passionate professionals can have on the future of medicine. And as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend or colleague, and leave us a review. Visit ctifacts.com to learn more about how we can help with your clinical trials. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep moving medicine forward.